Once upon a time in the village of Ayanfe, there lived a man named Mr. Dami. Mr. Dami was a young teacher from the big town of Lagos. His mind was sharp, his words smooth, and his smile could melt even the sternest hearts. When the government heard of the struggles in Ayanfe village, how their young girls were dropping out of school because of early pregnancies, they knew they needed someone special to help. That someone was Mr. Dami. The news of his transfer spread like wildfire. His coming to teach our daughters about life. The villagers whispered with excitement. His mission was clear, to educate the girls about their bodies, how to use protection, and how to avoid unwanted pregnancies that could ruin their futures. For in Ayanfe village, once a girl got pregnant, her books were shut forever, and she was married off to the man who had claimed her innocence. When Mr. Dami arrived, the village turned out to welcome him. The elders, dressed in their finest clothes, stood under the great Iroko tree. Barbara Johnny, the oldest and wisest, stepped forward. "Teacher Dami," he said, his voice like a drum beat, "you have come to save our daughters. They are like flowers in a storm and we need you to shield them." Mr. Dami nodded, his face serious. "I am here to guide them," he replied, "to teach them how to avoid mistakes that will close the doors to their future. They will learn to stay safe, to choose wisely, and to value their education above all." The parents sighed with relief. They had seen too many dreams crumble like dry leaves. With Dami here, things will change, they said, their hearts filled with hope. But as the villagers celebrated his arrival, no one saw the glint in Dami's eye, a spark that hinted at secrets he kept hidden in the folds of his charming smile. Mr. Dami quickly became the talk of the village. His ways were different from the old teachers. The girls had known he spoke to them gently, not with scolding or shouting. When he taught, it felt like a story unfolding, with everyone holding their attention like the strings of a puppet. He held his classes under the big mango tree in the schoolyard. The girls sitting on wooden benches listened as he explained things they had never dared to speak of. "A condom," he said, one day holding one up for them to see. "It's a shield, it protects you from the consequences of carelessness." His voice was calm but his words carried power. The girls nodded, the young minds absorbing every detail. "Your education is your future," he told them, "and you must not let anything or anyone take it away from you." Parents watching from afar marveled at how their daughters seemed eager to attend school again. "This Dami," they whispered, "is a blessing. Look how he opens their eyes." But the admiration was not one-sided. The girls began to look at Dami with wide eyes filled with something more than respect. His charming smile, his soft voice, the way he spoke to each of them like they mattered. It stirred feelings they didn't yet understand. They trusted him completely, like sheep following a shepherd unaware of the wolf that hid beneath his kindness. At first, Dami's actions seemed harmless. He started with small things, a touch on the shoulder here, a playful compliment there. "You're very smart," he would tell a girl smiling warmly. "One day you'll go far." His words made them blush, and his charm wrapped around them like the soft wool of a sheep's coat. But soon Dami's intentions grew darker. One sunny afternoon, after a lesson on the dangers of unprotected sex, he clapped his hands to gather the girls' attention. "Now you've all listened well," he said, his voice firm yet friendly. "But to truly understand what I am teaching, we must go beyond words. Learning is better with practice, isn't it?" The girls exchanged curious glances. What kind of practice could he mean? Dami smiled, sensing their confusion. "Don't worry," he said. "This is to help you understand so you can protect yourselves in the future." He paused, letting his words sink in. "One by one I will show you how everything I've taught works. Follow me inside and I will explain privately." The first girl hesitated but didn't question him. After all, he was their teacher, their guide. She followed him into the small room behind the classroom. "Don't be shy," he said, closing the door softly behind them. "This is for your benefit." Inside, Dami's tone changed. His voice grew softer and his words were laced with persuasion. The girl, unsure of what was happening, trusted him completely. He was a teacher and teachers don't lie. Inside, Mr. Dami opened the protection pack and asked the girl to help fix it on him, just the way he had taught them earlier. The innocent girl, thinking this is truly part of the lessons in education, did exactly as Mr. Dami instructed. Just like that, Mr. Dami started touching her in a way that wasn't normal, and from there they ended up on desk having fun. When Mr. Dami was done, the girl came out. Her face was blank and her steps were unsteady. The other girls looked at her with curiosity, but she said nothing. Mr. Dami had told her not to tell anyone what had happened inside, not her friends, or even her parents, for what happens in the room must stay in the room, so the girl kept quiet about it. Dami called the next girl and the pattern repeated. One by one they entered the room, and one by one they left with silent lips and heavy hearts. The girls didn't speak about what happened inside. Each one thought she was the only one, and shame kept their mouth shut. Dami's charm and authority silenced them like a hunter who traps his prey without making a sound, and so the bright light of their innocence dimmed one shadow at a time. As Dami's hidden agenda unfolded behind closed doors, Mr. Dami thought his secrets were safe. He believed the four walls of the small classroom hid his actions, but he didn't know that eyes were watching. One hot afternoon, as he called yet another girl into the room, Mako, the village's troublemaker, stood outside, peering through a crack in the wall. Mako had been drawn to the schoolyard by curiosity. He had noticed the pattern, girls leaving the classroom one by one, their faces shadowed with confusion. What's going on here? He wondered, his mind sharp as a blade, so he stayed hidden and watched. What he saw made his heart race, not with fear but with opportunity. Instead of shouting and exposing Mr. Dami, Mako kept quiet and left. He had a plan. Later that evening, as Dami made his way home, Mako stepped out from behind a tree blocking his path. "Our teacher Dami," he said, his voice smoothed like palm oil. "You've been very busy, haven't you?" Dami froze, his smile fading. "What do you mean?" he asked, his tone sharp. Mako chuckled, folding his arms across his chest. "Oh, nothing much. Just that I saw you today, you and the girls. Very interesting lessons you're giving." Dami's face grew pale. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped, trying to walk away, but Mako wasn't done. He stepped in front of Dami again, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "Don't be in such a hurry, teacher," he said. "See, I'm a man of the village, but I'm also a man who knows how to keep a secret for a price." Dami's heart pounded in his chest like a trapped bird. He knew Mako's reputation. If this man spoke, everything would be ruined. "What do you want?" Dami asked, his voice low. Mako leaned in, his grin widening. "It's simple," he said. "When you're done with the girls, send them my way. Let me have my share of the education." Dami hesitated, his mind racing, but he knew he had no choice. Mako's threat hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Finally he nodded. "Fine," he said, his voice bitter, "but keep your mouth shut." And just like that, the twisted partnership began. The next time Dami called a girl into his room, Mako waited in the shadows. When Dami was done, he sent the girl to Mako, saying, "Go to my friend Mako, he'll teach you something else." Mako, always ready, welcomed them with open arms. "You're safe with me," he would say, his words dripping with deceit. Together they formed a pact, each man feeding off the other's wickedness. But the shadows they cast grew darker with each passing day, and though they thought their secret was safe, the truth was like smoke. It could not be hidden forever. It started with Aduni, one of the brightest girls in the village. She was always the first to answer Dami's questions and the last to leave class. After one of Dami's private lessons, Aduni began to feel strange. Her body felt heavy and her stomach turned like a pot of boiling soup. At first she brushed it off. "It's nothing," she whispered to herself. "Maybe it's the yam I ate this morning." But the nausea didn't go away. Day after day she grew more tired, and her appetite disappeared like smoke in the wind. Aduni kept her troubles to herself. She was afraid to tell her mother, who was strict and wouldn't understand. "If she knows, she'll beat me," Aduni thought, her heart pounding. Meanwhile, Dami continued as if nothing was wrong. His charming smile and smooth words masked the growing storm. He called the girls one by one, his web of deceit growing larger with each passing day. But the shadows were starting to shift. The girls' silence was like a dam holding back a flood, and soon the cracks would begin to show. One warm evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the girls gathered by the river to fetch water. They laughed and chattered, their voices mingling with the sound of the rushing stream. But Aduni, sitting quietly on a rock, seemed distant. Her friend Mareo noticed and asked, "Aduni, are you okay? You've been so quiet these days." Aduni hesitated, her hands trembling. She looked at the other girls and said softly, "I don't feel well ever since my private lesson with Mr. Dami." The other girls fell silent. Mareo's eyes widened and she whispered, "He calls me for private lessons too." Aduni's head shot up. "He does?" One by one the girls began to speak. "He called me last week," one said, her voice shaky. "Me too," another added. The realization hit them like a heavy stone. They weren't the only ones. Dami's words, his promises, and his actions were the same for all of them. Shame and fear filled the air thick as a morning fog. "What do we do?" Mariah asked, her voice barely audible. "We can't tell anyone," Aduni said quickly. "Who would believe us?" They'd blame us instead. The girls nodded, their hearts heavy with fear. They knew the truth, but their silence held them captive, each one carrying the weight of their secret alone. But the cracks in the dam were growing wider, and it was only a matter of time before the flood would break free. One quiet evening, Mama Aduni sat outside her hut peeling cassava for dinner. From inside she heard a sharp sound, Aduni retching again. Mama Aduni rushed in to find her daughter hunched over, holding her stomach. "Aduni, are you sick?" she asked, her voice full of worry. "No, Mama," Aduni replied quickly, wiping her mouth. "It's just the food, I'm fine." But Mama Aduni wasn't convinced. She noticed the way Aduni avoided her gaze and the tiredness in her movements. Elsewhere in the village, Mama Maria was also growing suspicious. She noticed her daughter's clothes were getting tighter and her once cheerful child now seemed quiet and withdrawn. "Mareo," she asked one day, "why don't you eat with us anymore? Are you hiding something?" Mareo shook her head, but her silence spoke louder than words. It wasn't long before other mothers began to see the same signs in their daughters. Vomiting, swollen faces, the sudden need to avoid questions. One by one whispers turned into murmurs, and murmurs grew into alarm. The mothers gathered under the great Iroko tree, their faces heavy with worry. "Something is wrong," Mama Aduni said, her voice trembling. "Our daughters are not the same." "Yes," Mama Mareo agreed. "They hide their faces like criminals, and their bodies they are changing." Baba Rajoni, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. "This is no coincidence," he said, his voice deep and steady. "We must find the truth. Call the girls and ask them if they know what's going on. They must speak." The villagers nodded in agreement. The time for silence had passed. That evening, the mothers and elders gathered their daughters under the mango tree. The air was heavy and the stars above seemed dim. "Speak," Baba Ajoni commanded, his voice like a clap of thunder. "What is troubling you? Why are you hiding from us?" The girls looked at each other, their eyes filled with fear. None of them dared to speak, their secrets locked tightly in their hearts. But the parents were relentless. They questioned them one by one, their voices growing sharper with each denial. Finally Aduni broke down, her tears falling like rain. It was Mr. Dami, she confessed, her voice shaking. He called us for private lessons and said it was to help us, but it wasn't true. He lied to us. Gasp filled the air. "Mr. Dami?" Mama Mariah whispered, her hands flying to her chest. As if Aduni's confession opened a floodgate, the other girls began to speak too. "It's true," Mareo said, tears streaming down her face. "He made us trust him, and then he..." She couldn't finish her sentence, but the most shocking revelation was yet to come. One of the girls with trembling hands added, "It wasn't just him. He sent us to Mako too," he said. Mako would continue the lessons. The crowd erupted in anger. The betrayal burned like fire in their hearts. "Dami and Mako?" Baba Ajoni roared. "They have ruined our daughters." The parents, now filled with rage, decided they wouldn't wait. They would confront Dami and Mako that very night. "Bring torches," Baba Ajoni ordered. "We will go to Dami's house. He must face the consequences of his actions." The crowd moved as one, their anger lighting the dark night like a wildfire. Justice was coming and no one could escape it. Mako was lounging outside his hut chewing on a stick, when he overheard two women talking near the well. The parents, no one of them. She whispered, her voice sharp like the crack of a whip. "They're going to Dami's house tonight. He's finished." Marco's heart jumped. He spat out the stick and ran as fast as his legs could carry him to Dami's house. Bursting through the door, he found Dami calmly writing on a slate, unaware of the storm brewing outside. "Dami." Marco panted, his chest heavy. "They know. The parents are coming for you. They found out everything." Dami's hand froze and the color drained from his face. "What do you mean everything?" "I mean everything. The girls have spoken. They know what we've done." For a moment, Dami stood frozen, his mind racing. Then, like a man drowning, he grabbed onto the first thought that came to him. "We need to leave," he said quickly. Now the two men hurriedly packed their belongings, shoving clothes and valuables into bags. "We'll go to the town," Dami said, his voice trembling. "No one will find us there." "But what if the gods are watching?" Mako asked, his eyes darting around nervously. "They won't be expecting us to leave so soon," Dami replied. "We'll slip through the boundary before they even notice." As the parents gathered in the village square, torches lighting the night, Dami and Mako slipped into the shadows, heading toward the path that led out of the village. Their hearts pounded with fear, each step echoing like thunder in their ears. But unknown to them, the villagers were smarter than they thought. Barbara Johnny, sensing Dami might flee, had already sent a message to the village guards to block the boundary. As Dami and Mako approached the edge of the village, they saw the familiar sight of the boundary marker, a large wooden gate. Relief washed over them. "We're almost out," Dami whispered, but just as they reached the gate, a sharp voice called out, "Stop there." Dami and Mako froze. From the shadows, the village guards emerged, their spears glinting in the moonlight, looking for something. One of them asked, his tone cold and commanding. Mako tried to talk his way out. We just going for a walk," he stammered. The guards laughed. "A walk in the middle of the night? With bags on your back?" He shook his head. "You're not going anywhere." Before they could run, the guards grabbed them, tying their hands with thick ropes. "You thought you could escape justice?" The leader of the guards said, his voice cutting through the night like a blade. News of their capture spread through the village like wildfire. By the time Dami and Mako were dragged back to the square, the entire community was waiting, their faces filled with anger and betrayal. Barbara Johnny stepped forward, his voice boom. "You thought you could harm our daughters and run away? You will face justice here in front of everyone." The crowd roared in agreement, their torches blazing like the fury in their hearts. Dami and Mako, once so confident in their deceit, now stood trembling, knowing that their punishment would be swift and severe. The village square was packed with people, their faces grim and their hearts heavy with betrayal. Torches flickered in the night, casting long shadows over the crowd at the center. Dami and Mako knelt, their hands tied behind their backs. They were surrounded by the village elders whose expressions were as unyielding as stone. Barbara Johnny stepped forward, his voice cutting through the embers of the crowd. "You, Dami, came to our village as a teacher and trusted with the future of our daughters. And you, Mako, betrayed your people by aiding him. Tonight you will face the consequences of your actions." The crowd roared in agreement, their anger like a rising tide. Two hefty men stepped forward, each carrying a long whip made of leather. Without hesitation, the punishment began. The whips cracked through the air, landing on Dami's back with a sound that made the crowd flinch. He cried out, his voice breaking with each lash, but no one looked away. Mako's turn came next. His screams echoed through the square as the lashes rained down. The punishment continued until both men were slumped over, their faces pressed into the dirt. When the flogging ended, Barbara Johnny raised his hand to silence the crowd. "This is not the end of your punishment," he said. "Dami, you will remain in this village. You will care for every girl you have wronged, and the children they will bear you will provide for them, an answer to their families until your last breath." The crowd cheered, but Barbara Johnny wasn't done. He turned to Mako. "You, Mako, will serve this village as a laborer. You will work in the fields, on the roads, and wherever else we see fit, and you will never again come near the young girls of Ayanfe." With those words, the two men were dragged away, their fate sealed. The villagers watched in silence, knowing that justice had been served. In the days that followed, the village began to heal. The girls, though scarred by their experiences, found comfort in their families. Mothers held their daughters close, whispering words of love and assurance. Fathers vowed to protect them, their anger turning into determination to ensure this would never happen again. The elders too took action. They introduced strict measures to safeguard the young girls, ensuring that no stranger could gain their trust so easily again. Teachers would be carefully chosen and no man would ever be left alone with the girls. Dami, now a shadow of the man he once was, worked tirelessly to fulfill his punishment. Every day he visited the families of the girls, bringing food, money, and support. His face carried the weight of shame, and his name became a warning to others. Mako too worked under the blazing sun, his back bent as he toiled in the fields. The villagers watched him closely, ensuring he stayed far from the young girls he had once betrayed. Over time, the girls began to find strength with their family's support. Some returned to school, determined to rebuild their futures. Their laughter, though faint at first, slowly returned to the village like sunlight, breaking through a storm. The story of Dami and Mako became a tale told around fires and in moonlight gatherings. It served as a reminder of the danger of blind trust and the strength of a united community. Ayanfe village, though scarred, stood stronger than ever, its people bound by a shared lesson and a promise to protect their own. And so life went on, but the memory of those dark days lingered, a shadow that reminded everyone of the price of betrayal and the power of justice. I hope you enjoyed the story. If so, please like the video, comment what you learned from the tale, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more enchanting tales just like this one. And I will see you in another story. Bye.